Hello, my name is Gianna Casal, and I'll be presenting on the Toronto serial killer Bruce McArthur. So some basic facts about Bruce McArthur is that between 2010 and 2017, 8 men disappeared from the gay village of Church and Wesley in Toronto, Canada. He was arrested on January 8th in 2018, and he's the most prolific serial killer known to have been active in Toronto, and also the oldest as well. So let's go into some background about his earlier life to get a look into the sociological, psychological, and biological factors that have impacted him to be the killer that he is today. So he was born on October 8th, 1951 in Lindsay, Ontario. He was raised in a farm on McArthur Lakes region. In addition to him and his sister, his parents fostered troubled children from Toronto, often with 6 to 10 children under their care at any given time. They had a really good reputation throughout the town. He attended a one-room schoolhouse and was known to be a teacher's pet and a tattletale. He was also really good at singing competitions. His mother was Irish Catholic and his father was Scottish Presbyterian. Both were extremely devout, causing arguments between both his parents and himself and his father, as McArthur supported his mother. With that, it led to problems with his father, who he felt suspected his homosexuality, leading to a lot of verbal abuse, not physical and not sexual. He then attended a Fenelon Falls Secondary School where he met and began dating Janice Campbell, who became his wife. They were married when he was 23, 3 years after they both graduated high school. So, after marriage in 1973, he began working for Eaton's department stores a few blocks away from a new gay village. In the mid-1990s, his father was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he was sent to a nursing home. He was disappointed with his mother when she took interest in other men, which led him to become much closer to his father, which is interesting given their history of verbal abuse. He passed away in 1981, and by the time his father passed, McArthur had a daughter and a son and was very, very active in his church. He was active in his church and was not acting on his homosexuality until early 90s, when he began having sexual affairs. A year later, he came out to his wife and they continued to live together. That unfortunately did not last long. Sometime after 1993, McArthur's employment in the clothing trade came to an end, and the couple faced financial difficulty. This was in part due to his losing his job, but also to their teenage son, Todd, who was obsessively making obscene phone calls to women he did not know and was later arrested. So because of this financial difficulty, the couple mortgaged their home in 1997 and declared bankruptcy in 1991. They separated and he moves to Toronto, where he frequents the bars of Church and Wesley while pursuing a 4-year relationship with another man. When they broke up and his divorce was being finalized, he was prescribed Prozac for several months. So a few years after their breakup and his divorce being finalized, is his first real recorded violent altercation. Just after noon on October 31st, 2001, he had just turned 50. McArthur followed actor and model Mark Henderson into his apartment building after being invited into his apartment to see his Halloween costume. There, he struck Henderson several times from behind with an iron pipe that he often carried. He had suffered injuries to his head and body and needed several stitches on the back of his head and his fingers, as well as 6 weeks of physiotherapy. McArthur turned himself in after the attack and said he did not remember the incident or why he might have done it. By April 11th, 2003, he received a conditional sentence of 729 days and spent the first year of his sentence under house arrest, followed by a 6-month curfew and 3-year probation. He was barred from church in Wesley except for work and medical appointments, and had to at least stay 33 feet from the victim's home or workplace, and could not spend any time with male prostitutes. He was also forbidden to possess firearms for 10 years, and he was not to purchase, possess, or consume drugs without a medical prescription, and specifically not to possess poppers. He also had to submit his DNA to a database, and he was compelled to undertake psychological and psychiatric counseling, including anger management. Even the district attorney's office and the defense thought that this was very, very strange and was very serious for his first offense. They thought maybe the judge thought he was a threat to all male prostitutes at the time. This leads into the crimes that we now know him famous for. His 8 victims, his targets, were usually vulnerable, poor, lonely, and new immigrants, and they were all taking their first steps to explore their sexuality in a new, accepting, and what they thought was a safe country, which is absolutely heartbreaking. McArthur disappeared on September 6, 2010, 2 weeks after McArthur's daughter was married in Windsor. McArthur had romantic relationships with McArthur in the 2000s and was listed as a friend on his Facebook page. Abdulzali Fazee disappeared on December 29, 2010. Kenyan disappeared in 2012. Mohammadi in 2015, and the other 3 murdered either in 2015, 2017, and the case of Lewaski possibly in late 2016. So McArthur's approach was methodical and consistent across all boards. He liked litigar strangulation. Using a metal rope and bar to tighten was his preferred technique. After death, he posed and photographed them, sometimes in the 19th floor apartment that he lived in, or in his Dodge Caravan. He also stored his photo shoots in digital files so he could relive the moments at his own whim. One victim was posed wearing a fur coat with a cigar in his mouth. Some had their beards and head shaves. Others had their eyes closed and had the strangulation still around their necks. He also took close-up photos of their genitalia. He then dismembered his victims, distributing their body parts in clients' gardens. He worked as a very prolific gardener, and he relished in this knowledge, even more so when they complimented on his green thumb. So as more and more men went missing in the church in Wesley Village, many of its supporters cried outrage as it was obviously becoming an issue. So it suddenly became the largest investigation ever conducted by the Toronto Police Service. They called on the resources of the Ontario Provincial Police, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and other forensic services. And it led to a dedicated missing persons unit called Project Prism. It was overseen by Detective Sergeant Michael Richmond and led by Detective Sergeant Hank Insignia. Kingsman's disappearance was central to the creation of Project Prism because of a lead obtained at the end of July. In mid-September, detectives applied for tracking warrants for 2 vehicles registered to McArthur. And in a December 8th news conference, Project Prism investigators said that they had completed 62 witness interviews, 28 judicial authorizations, and assigned 308 actions, of which 225 had been completed. So, as stated in the last slide, Andrew Kinsman's disappearance became McArthur's downfall. He was extremely prominent in the village pride circuit as well as AIDS movement, and people noticed he was gone. Police officers surveilling McArthur by then had decided to apprehend him shortly after they saw a young man enter his apartment on January 8th, 2018, believing that the man's life was at risk. He was. He had met McArthur through a dating app and had met for sex several times. He agreed to keep his relationship with McArthur secret, but with that being said, he let himself be handcuffed to McArthur's steel bed frame, just thinking this was some sort of rough sex BDSM part that they were including in the bedroom. But it crossed that line where McArthur put a bag over his head and tried to tape his mouth shut before police officers interrupted him. Police then seized electronic devices from the apartment, including 5 cell phones, 5 computers, 3 digital cameras, and about 12 USB flash drives. It prompted the investigators to charge McArthur with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the presumed deaths of Andrew Kinsman and Salim Asin. Their bodies had not been found, but police said they had a pretty good idea of how they died. That is actually a picture of the day, January 18th, of McArthur's apartment and his bedroom, which I find interesting how these are published today. These are also slides from after his arrest, where they eventually found his bodies that he had buried in his gardening, also his car, and the hallway of his apartment. So the aftermath of this is that McArthur entered a guilty plea early in court proceedings, but showed no signs of remorse at all. The sentencing judge noted that McArthur no doubt would have continued killing innocent victims if not apprehended, and we can see that by how he was acting on the 18th. If police had not intercepted that day, we most likely would have had a new victim. He was given a life sentence on each murder charge with a non-parole period of 25 years. He will most likely die in prison. The internal investigation was also conducted within the Toronto Police Department in the wake of this case due to an anti-gay bias that said throughout the years of 2016, when he was first seen as being aggressive in bed, to eventually his arrest in 2018, the Toronto police did not want to look into any cases involving Church and Wesley or any cases involving gay victims. That being said, we're lucky today that he has been caught. We still don't know exactly why he did what he did, and that is still a question that he has not answered and will not divulge. Luckily, he is now spending his life in prison. And these are my sources. So thank you.